Hey guys, welcome once again. This is a live episode. Oops, I don't think that worked actually. Stand by. Take two. Hello, friends, and welcome once again to a live episode of Syracuse Sports. As the Orange have added a quarterback, his name is Steve Angeli, an Angeli from heaven. Steve, peanut butter, and Angeli. I'll stop with the puns at this point. But it's a big move as Syracuse has a starting quarterback by title, and his name is Rickie Collins, as has been named by head coach Fran Brown. But Rickie Collins got hurt at the end of training camp. Rickie Collins, along with all the other quarterbacks in the room, have no actual experience playing a college game. Fran Brown said a week ago during an interview on ESPN Syracuse that he was going to pursue a quarterback in the transfer portal. And that quarterback has arrived, and his name is Steve Angeli. So you got Brent, you got Chris Carlson here. We're going to hear from our Syracuse Sports Insiders coming up. We're also going to hear from Pete Samson from The Athletic, who covers Notre Dame. Does a terrific job at that, covering the Fighting Irish, to give us a perspective of the kind of quarterback Syracuse is getting in Steve Angeli. So, Chris, your first reactions to the official news that a quarterback has been added to the room that has actual college experience, and that Syracuse took a big swing here and brought in a quarterback from one of the premier programs in college football.
Yeah, another quarterback competition in the fall, right? That's my first instinct, is we're doing it all over again. Rickie Collins is the starter in name. I don't imagine that changes, but I also assume that Steve Angeli is not coming here to be a backup. So I expect it to be a pretty open competition once we get to fall.
Yeah, this is a big boy move, right? You look at programs that are national championship contenders, that are college football playoff contenders, which Fran Brown has said he wants Syracuse to be. And there are multiple quarterbacks in the room, be it five-star quarterbacks or quarterbacks that are capable going out there and playing Division I college football, right? And Pete Samson's going to make a good point about this a little later on in the pod. There's a lot of bad quarterback play in college football, right? Because you got to bring in guys, you got to develop them. Even with the advent of the transfer portal and everything, there's still a lot of average quarterback play. So if you can cut down on the variables in the unknowns and bring in somebody with experience, bring in somebody that has the physical attributes, bring in somebody that's highly rated, and in this era, Chris, bring in somebody that's familiar with the coaching staff. Steve Angeli went to Bergen Catholic High School in New Jersey, which is coached by Vito Campanelli. It should sound familiar as Nunzio Campanelli, of course, is Syracuse's quarterbacks coach and co-offensive coordinator. Fran Brown and a lot of these coaches have recruited the Northeast, recruited New Jersey in particular, so they know Steve Angeli, and they bring in Steve Angeli with a little familiarity, not only from that, Chris, but he is a player that fits this offense, that fits what Syracuse did a year ago with Kyle McCord. And they were trying fervently to get a waiver for Kyle McCord, right? They eventually abandoned that plan with McCord moving on and going to the NFL draft. Now, I'm not comparing Steve Angeli to Kyle McCord. Pete Samson will actually do that for us a little later on in the interview, and he makes a pretty intriguing point about Angeli's game. But this puts almost Kyle McCord light, if you will, into the quarterback position. And you can do a lot of the same things with that offense that you did a year ago. And Chris, you said it. Look, the quarterback camp competition is back on here. You don't bring in a quarterback of this caliber, nor does he sign at Syracuse, without at least the understanding that he is going to have a fair shot to start at quarterback. And just by bringing a player of his experience and talent into the room, he is going to shine in that room, and he's going to prove to these coaches that he deserves to be in that competition and in that conversation. And that's not a slight on Rickie Collins, and we'll get into his injury situation in a second here. Just when you bring in a quarterback at a big boy program with two guys that are capable of being the starter, Angeli just came from that situation at Notre Dame, and now he comes to Syracuse where there's two capable starters that have come from major programs.
Yeah, there's no real reason why a team that's going into a season with an unproven starter, which either that these guys is going to be Rickie Collins or Steve Angeli. Both have not played a ton of college football. Steve Angeli a little bit more. But if you're going to be unproven, there's no reason why you shouldn't have a pretty talented room where a lot of guys think they have a shot, right? It seems to me like you have two sort of options with your quarterback room. If you go the Kyle McCord route, everybody knows he's the starter. So the guy that you're going to have the backup knows that he's a backup, and that is who he is, and he's okay doing that for a year. And when you have a guy like Rickie Collins, nothing in that situation should be given. So you should have sort of two potential starters in the room competing. It just only makes sense to me, right? Because both guys should think they can win this job. Rickie Collins has been here. He's learned the system. If they play even in the spring, I presume Rickie Collins thinks it's his job because he's been named the starter. And if you're Steve Angeli, Rickie Collins has thrown 7 passes in mop-up duty for his entire career. So why can't I come in and beat that guy? Both of these guys should think that they have a legitimate chance. So that allows you to build a talented room.
It's interesting because Rickie Collins came to Syracuse partially because Grant Nussmeier came back to LSU, or Garrett Nussmeier, pardon me, back to LSU, right? Knowing he wasn't going to be the starter, Syracuse really wanted him. Come to Syracuse, develop, have a chance to win the job, and you could be our quarterback for 3 years. That's something that Fran Brown mentioned in that interview last week, that if he makes it 3 years, either by somebody doesn't swipe him in the portal or he goes to the NFL, right? That's the talent that Fran Brown thinks Rickie Collins has. Steve Angeli comes from Notre Dame, where he did not win the quarterback competition, and Notre Dame is getting the best of the best, and Pete Samson will explain a little later why maybe Angeli did not stand out, even as the guy with experience. He came in the college football playoff against Penn State, drove Notre Dame down the field, 6 of 7, looked great, right? We've seen that, though. We've seen those bursts from the backup quarterback who come in and they have those flash-in-the-pan moments. He had, I'm just going to give you the numbers here, for Angeli last year. He was the primary backup to Riley Leonard at Notre Dame. 24 of 36, 268 yards, 3 touchdowns. He got 8 games of spot relief, which is 8 games and 236 yards and everything more than any quarterback in the room at Syracuse. Chris, as we have talked about many times, this is one of the hardest schedules in college football next year. And this coaching staff, no matter how much they believe in Rickie Collins, had to have a little agita about putting a newly minted starter up against Tennessee in week 1 and just go through all the names that Syracuse will play on that schedule next year. Many of those big games on the road, but even a North Carolina and Bill Belichick, who knows how to game plan against a freshman quarterback coming to the Dome. And that is a really hard schedule. Oh, by the way, Syracuse goes to Notre Dame November 22nd. That's Notre Dame's senior day. So could we see if he does win the job, a Steve Angeli, CJ Carr standoff in South Bend, if you will? But that's for down the road here. So both quarterbacks with pedigrees at Notre Dame and LSU, but both either lost out on a quarterback job or really didn't want to compete for the quarterback job. So that should be noted too. They're certainly talented guys, but it's interesting that Syracuse is still kind of taking players from programs above them, the major independent in college football and the SEC, and trying to make it work here at the ACC level.
Well, those schools get the most talented guys every year.
Yeah.
Right. And they stack them. And eventually, one of those talented guys realizes hey, I'm not going to start here. And so, that's the way it works. Kyle McCord, he's going to be, I think, a rarity in that he started for one of those programs versus sort of, lost the starter's job, but we're still a little unclear sort of where he might have stood in the quarterback competition if he went back. So, I think this is just going to be Syracuse's sort of pool probably for a while, unless they get a really talented homegrown kid that they really fall in love with. So
Angeli, 6'2", he's got and I'm going to leave it more to Pete Samson to describe him as a player because he has seen him up close and personal for the past few years here. But he's got a big arm. He's not the most mobile quarterback in the world. He can take off and run, especially when you're not expecting him to. He can kind of dart up the middle and get those 8-9 10-yard gains. He can do it. He's big. And I'll leave it to Sampson to describe an element of his game that he thinks will improve if he wins the job at Syracuse over Kyle McCord, who is about to be drafted and set the ACC record for single-season passing last year. Chris, we have to discuss the element here, though. A question that I have. Would Syracuse have pursued any quarterback, let alone Steve Angeli, who was not on the board a week ago? Okay, Angeli was a late entrant into the portal, sensed he was not going to win the job at Notre Dame, got his name in there before the portal closed, visited Syracuse, Tulane, and Virginia Tech, who have open quarterback jobs, by the way.
Kyron Drones is coming back at Virginia Tech.
He is coming back. That's true, but
he's hurt.
He would have had the opportunity, Angeli would, to maybe move in there and win that job. They showed interest in him, right?
Yep.
But it's Syracuse that he chose to come to, right? And it's Syracuse where he'll have the opportunity to start. But my question is, if Rickie Collins did not get hurt at the end of camp, would Syracuse have pursued him or any quarterback for that matter? Collins, remember, was held out of the spring game and did not participate in Syracuse's Monday practice after the spring game and their Wednesday practice, which was a closed practice in Rochester. He did not participate in either one of those practices. It is a thumb injury, okay? I'm not a doctor. I just play one on a podcast here, but a thumb injury on your throwing hand is going to present some concerns from a coaching staff perspective, from everybody's perspective. I've been told, Chris, that he did have surgery on that hand. He saw a specialist. Surgery was recommended. Fran Brown said that the timeline for Rickie to come back is June. Summer workouts, get in that flow before camp starts in early August. So if they stick to that timeline, he will have time to recover, but that's a tricky thing when you're talking about a thumb on a throwing hand, getting your grip back, getting your flow back, and now you've got a seasoned quarterback in the room to compete with you. So that's why this is a competition all over again. Because if Angeli can come in there healthy and prove that he can run this offense and is just better than Rickie, can connect with the receivers. Remember, Trevor Pena, which this did not make Fran Brown happy, but Pena, and we don't know the context of this. We're taking Fran's word on this. But Pena had questioned in some way, according to Fran Brown, Rickie starting as the quarterback of this team, right? So you have to put that into consideration. So I'm wondering, and I don't know the answer to this yet, if Collins didn't get hurt, are they looking for a quarterback in the portal? I'd say yes, because you still need experience in that room. But would it be Steve Angeli is my question. Did they have to get more aggressive knowing that Rickie had that injury? Because remember, they also had a quarterback from Georgia State visit, and there are guys you can bring in that it's pretty clear, like, Rickie's our starter. You can compete, air quotes, but you're not the guy. Steve Angeli's not that kind of player. Steve Angeli is being brought here with the understanding that either he is the starter or will have a more than fair chance to compete to be the starter.
I mean, I just don't see why you wouldn't bring somebody in, right? Like it is not a hard sell to me to any quarterback that thinks they're a starting P4 quarterback. Hey, come compete with Rickie Collins in the fall. Like, he hasn't proven anything. Like, I will take that opportunity if I am like a quarterback coming from a bigger program who's stuck behind a couple guys. And Fran Brown has said, like, I want competition at every position. And that's what we do it here. And, you know, the way to live up to that is to, bring in the best quarterback you can in the fall. Now, once again, right, matter of connections, just like it was with Kyle McCord, that it happens to be Steve Angeli. You mentioned the Campanelli connection, the jersey. Like, it certainly helps that it's like a guy that they know and that might be inclined to come to this program. That all helps. You know, if it was just another guy, would it have been the same? I don't know. But I just think, like, the situation here was ripe for them to bring in a more talented guy because they don't have a Kyle McCord who's going to scare people off.
And Chris, I sort of buried the lead on something here. Steve Angeli has 2 years of eligibility.
Yep.
This is not a placeholder grad student, kind of ease the time for Rickie Collins to develop. Then he's fully the guy in 2026. Now, if Angeli wins the job, he could have that job for 2 years, which is going to create an interesting discussion about Rickie Collins, who has 3 years of eligibility remaining. Right.
Well, someone will leave right after the season, probably.
Well, that's it. So there's 2 days left in this portal window. What does a Jakari Williams do? I've been told Luke Carney's not going anywhere. Luke Carney's going to be here. He's going to ride it out. He's only in his first semester here, and he is going to try and compete in the future for this job. And by the way, Luke Carney has been doing really well at practice. He did exceptionally well, I'm told, at that Wednesday practice in Rochester when, Rickie Collins was not out there because he was injured and was not participating in practice. But Luke essentially took not the job, but took the day from Jakari Williams and earned a lot of respect with the team. The coaches admire his toughness. They admire his mobility. They admire how he's just getting better. Remember, this guy that logged a lot of miles in high school football, threw for over 10,000 yards. He won 4 state titles at Texas. He's, I don't want to say the secret weapon, but he's kind of that weapon lying in wait, just not ready. You don't want to put a freshman out there against this schedule, right? But he's impressing. But the math ain't mathin', as the kids would say, Chris. So I would expect maybe another name to go in the portal. But of course, the big question is, what does Rickie Collins do? Does he see this as a slight? Does he see this as, this is not what you told me? It's not what you sold me. I was the starter. What's going on here? Does he see it as an opportunity to maybe to grab a starting job somewhere else? Or does he heed what you said about Fran Brown? We're about competition at every position. And if you really think you can be the guy, then you'll beat Steve Angeli and you'll be our quarterback despite the obstacles that have been put in your place.
I mean, I think it probably depends on how he feels the communication has been, right? Like if I feel the coaching staff has been straight with me throughout, they kept me informed, they told me who they were going after. They didn't tell me they weren't going to bring in anybody else, right? When they told me I was the starter, I wasn't made any promises, that meant forever, right? If I feel good about the way the staff communicated with me and they tell me, you're our starter and you have an open competition in the fall, I'm coming back. And I will take my chances in that competition because I got to win a job somewhere. Wherever you go, you have to win the job. Now, if I feel misled or if I feel deceived or something like that, then I don't trust the coaches if they tell me it's an open competition. And then maybe I look elsewhere. So we don't know right now how Rickie feels about how the communication went. Fran has a great reputation in that regard. But to me, that determines what I do if I'm Rickie Collins.
Chris, I want to go to some questions from our Syracuse Sports Insiders, and then had an opportunity to catch up with Pete Samson from The Athletic today. Does a phenomenal job covering Notre Dame. He is the guy for Notre Dame stuff, and he had some very interesting insight and things to say about Steve Angeli and what he could do at Syracuse. But our Syracuse Sports Insiders bringing the heat right off the bat, Chris. Here we go. Who's going to start opening day against Tennessee? And Rondell, I hate to cop out of this question. I do. I love to answer these questions. That's what sports discussion is all about. But listen, I can't answer that until I know how healthy Rickie Collins is. If Collins comes back in June, I go to camp, I watch practice, he looks okay, there's no setbacks, he looks like the quarterback that I saw in spring, then I do think he could ride it out, beat Angeli in camp and be the starter. But until I know how healthy he is, you know what? I got to say that Steve Angeli is going to be the starter because now I've got a question mark around Rickie Collins' name and how healthy he is and how much he can compete. Fran said June, and we'll see if that's a timeline that holds. But again, hand injury, thumb, throwing hand, required surgery. What's the recovery time? There's a lot of unanswered questions here. I'm not a doctor, so we have to see how that plays out.
I would take the more seasoned quarterback. So I will, I don't think it's decided. It'll be determined, I think, by who plays better in the fall, but I would bet on Angeli.
It's just amazing how this has gone, Chris, because they brought in Rickie. I wrote a column, must have been the second or third day of camp, that said, I've seen enough. Rickie Collins is the starter. With this group, Fran Brown said on the first day of camp, we're not going to mess around. This team needs to know who their quarterback is, which I still think was the right move.
You're the starter. You're the starter until you're not. You're the starter
until you're not. Chris, once upon a time, Ryan Nassib was the starting quarterback until a guy named Greg Paulus came in and was the starting quarterback, right? You constantly have to upgrade the quarterback room. And I know I have beaten this drum many times, but I'm going to grab my drumsticks and I'm going to say it again. Kyle McCord was an anomaly last year. He was the first quarterback for Syracuse to go the distance, not being replaced either by injury or performance in a game. since Ryan Nassib in 2012, who firmly took over that job eventually after Greg Paulus had his 1 year at the helm in 2009. It is important to have, go ahead.
That is the reason why I think it's a good, like, both guys are still, to me, in a good situation. Like,
yes,
this schedule, like, there is a pretty good chance that both guys play, both guys get tape. Like, the guy will win it on the field in an actual game versus fall camp long term. So to me, like, I still think it is a good situation for both quarterbacks.
That's a great point. And I think both of those guys recognize that and should recognize that, but we're in the portal era now. Things are different. Matty G says, I respect Fran Brown for remaining aggressive despite naming a starter. Going into the schedule, experience will make a huge impact. He notes Rickie has 3 years of eligibility. I think he does. So I hope that he remains on board to develop. From Mike S., who says, this is why naming a starter so early might have backfired. If they both stay, then the quarterback room may be as strong as it has been in many a season. Yeah, that's the if, right? I don't regret naming a starter early. I like that. The team's got to know who their quarterback is, but you're the starter till you're not. It's a fluid situation, especially in the portal era. Mike G. says, I don't want to lose Collins at the expense of Angeli. Look, it's a fair thought these days. I mean, Rickie Collins is set to get about initially $500,000-ish, and then there's opportunities that will come. If you are QB1, more commercials will come, more endorsements, more opportunities in the NIL world will come. I don't know what Angeli's getting NIL-wise, Chris, but I would imagine a Notre Dame quarterback with that kind of pedigree would not come to Syracuse, A, without the opportunity to start, and B, without the promise of about the same. Right?
Yeah, good money.
There's a comment here I'll get to about that, about money, but let me get a couple more in here first. Frankie S. says, I like this move. It's what the biggest programs do. Syracuse will lose their fair share, sure, but this is no time to cry. And then he notes, do you guys feel this is a long-term move for the quarterback room? Angeli's got 2 years. Rickie's got 3. It's about as long-term as you can get in this day and age, right?
Yep.
Sanjay says, we had a backup who won the starting job, but is not a shoo-in. Angeli is a strong, more experienced backup, so wouldn't be surprised if they had some rotating quarterbacks in the mix.
I think Fran likes the guy, right? Like, I don't know. He seems like the type that wants a, he wants his starter to be a starter.
Mike M. says this, there's too much money wrapped up in the quarterback position. Collins would have to go. Maybe Pena was onto something. Mike, I respectfully disagree with you. You can never put too much money in your quarterback position. That is the position you invest the most in. If that's one guy or 2 or even 3, you can't put too much money in the quarterback room. So I disagree with you there. Maybe Pena was onto something. I don't know. That I hate to cop out here, but that remains to be seen, right?
I don't think, right? Like to me, like, both of these guys probably make good money, but if you want like a top of the line starter, you're probably paying them great money. Like, you're probably paying these two talented, unproven quarterbacks. And I think you can probably afford to do that. I also don't know, I don't think you can just cancel a guy's contract, right? Like I don't think you can just say like, hey, Rickie, like, get out and we're going to keep your money. Like, that has to be his choice, or you look pretty bad. Like, I don't think that's an option.
That would look really bad if that was the case. Yeah.
But
we're in the Wild West, Chris. It wouldn't surprise me if they could do that. No.
But like, that would get around if like that was the move you made. Now you could tell him, hey, you're not our starter. You might want to pursue other opportunities, but you can't just be like, hey, get out, and that money we promised you, that's not there. Like, I don't think you can do that.
Look, Miami's reportedly paying Carlson back $4 million because they can. And because that's worth it to them to have a quarterback of that caliber, even if it's only for a year or 2.
And he's an established P4 starter. So he gets established
P4, established money, established P4 starter, and they think they can win the national championship. They think they can win the ACC and get in the playoffs. So a $4 million investment, in that case, in one quarterback, is worth it to them. And you can go through some of the other numbers. Look at what happened with Nico at Tennessee. He wanted... he got over his skis. He wanted a certain number. Tennessee said no. And then essentially Tennessee and UCLA traded quarterbacks. He's getting 1.5. Not bad, but it's not the 4 that he was reportedly seeking. And he agreed to a deal prior to that and tried to renegotiate that deal after one good year. And it was a good year. Tennessee went to the college football playoff last year. And now Syracuse will be facing Joey Aguilar on opening day instead of Nico. That's how these things go, right? It's what you're willing to pay, what's worth it to you, especially if you're on that level. And if you're Syracuse, you're on a level that's trying to get into that college football playoff. I know how hard the schedule is. We all know how hard the schedule is. But in their minds, they're 4th and 1 and 4th and 9 from the college football playoff. So if they can upgrade and spend the money, it's not what Miami's paying. It's not what Tennessee's paying or UCLA's paying. But Syracuse to have 2 quarterbacks of that caliber in the room, you're not spending too much, in my opinion. All right, Chris, I think that'll do it for our Syracuse Sports Insiders this time around. But certainly you guys are going to be pretty busy texting us about this news and the portal closing up here. The basketball portal just wrapped up and all the things happening here. That's why being a Syracuse Sports Insider has its benefits, friends. Right there on your screen, how you can sign up to have direct text message access to me anytime. It's just $3.99 a month. You get exclusive voice on this podcast, and you can try it free for 2 weeks. So check that out. All right, Chris.
Are you closing with the smartest person, Pete Samson? Are you kicking me out and we're saying hello to Pete?
I would say of the 3 names, I would put him number 1 on the list. How about that?
All right.
I'll let everybody else do their power rankings from there. But thank you. By the way, Chris wrote an excellent piece that was up earlier this week on syracuse.com. A lot of you already read it. If you haven't, I would highly encourage you to go do so, about Trevor Pena, Syracuse, the portal, Fran Brown saying the quiet part out loud, which Syracuse needed to do, and he finally broke through and did it. So if you have not, please go read Chris's story on that. Excellent work on that, my friend.
Thanks, Brent. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Chris. So we're going to boot Chris out, and we are going to bring in a gentleman by the name of Pete Samson. Pete does an amazing job covering Notre Dame for The Athletic. In my opinion, there's a lot of good ones. Okay, Notre Dame is obviously one of the premier programs in college athletics, and there's a lot of great reporters that cover that team, but Pete is the best. Had a chance to catch up with Pete to figure out what kind of quarterback Syracuse got in Steve Angeli here. If you haven't been following the Notre Dame quarterback battle like Pete has, let's take a listen to what he has to say about Syracuse bringing in Steve Angeli. Here's Pete Samson. So, Pete, the race was on in South Bend to replace Riley Leonard as the starting quarterback. And I guess it kind of still is, right? But ultimately, why was Steve Angeli not the guy who got selected to replace Riley Leonard?
I think that Marcus Freeman viewed Steve Angeli as like a good, capable quarterback, but not one that was going to win in the college football playoff. And I think it's not just upside with CJ Carr and to a certain extent Kenny Minchie. It's what CJ Carr has already shown. Whereas I think Steve Angeli is a quarterback who is really smart and will take what the defense gives you. CJ Carr is also really smart, will take what the defense gives you, and also will take things the defense doesn't want to give you. He can throw guys open with I hate to use the term arm talent, but there's just more with CJ Carr than there was with Steve Angeli. And it's not, I think if Steve Angeli had won the job here, Notre Dame probably would have won 9 or 10 games with him. I think that the bet on Carr is not only are you going to win 10 games with him, but you've got a chance to win in January. And I think the way the sport is going at places like Notre Dame, that's how you define successful seasons now. So I think Marcus Freeman looked at CJ Carr and was like, this is a guy who can win in the postseason for us potentially. Whereas he felt like Steve Angeli was, maybe a little bit more limited in that way.
So what you said about Angeli, he could leave Notre Dame to 9 or 10 wins. I think Syracuse fans perked up a little bit there. They won 10 games last year with Kyle McCord at quarterback. And Pete, they tried like hell to get Kyle McCord another year of eligibility. Now, I don't know if he would have taken it, given that he's currently in the NFL draft and maybe still would have gone down that path. But there was an attempt made. From what I've seen of Steve, I don't know if he's on McCord's level, but I see a lot of similarities in what they could implant into the Syracuse offense that they did last year, which led the country in passing, by the way. And I think it's intriguing. So give me kind of the Mel Kiper Jr. breakdown Angeli and what kind of quarterbacks coming into that room?
I mean, I could see some similarities there. I think that Angeli takes care of the football way better than Kyle McCord did.
Interesting.
Does he have as big of an arm as McCord did? I don't think so. But I think Angeli is self-aware that he knows what he can and can't throw, whereas McCord, I think, is kind of more of a gunslinger type. So I think with Angeli, the football IQ is very high. Good leader, very well respected in the locker room. Those are probably similarities to McCord. So I think he will come in and fit in just fine. When you watch Syracuse last year, they looked rejuvenated in part because of Kyle McCord. I think Steve Angeli can sort of keep that going. There's so much bad quarterback play in college football right now. Like Syracuse is not going to have bad quarterback play with Steve Angeli. So, but I think he will turn the ball over a lot less than Kyle McCord did. I also think he'll probably will not make the wow throws that McCord would make from time to time. But in terms of leadership personality, probably some similarities there.
So he comes into a room, Pete, that's really interesting at Syracuse. They lose McCord, right? So they're trying to move on from him. They bring in Rickie Collins Jr. from LSU, who is very talented. What I saw in camp with the quarterbacks he was competing against, he's clearly the guy. A little twist. At the end of camp, Rickie suffers a thumb injury. Now, Fran Brown has said he'll be back in June, back throwing, and right now it appears he's on track to do that. But it's a tricky injury for a quarterback, particularly on your throwing hand. And I look at it as a guy that in Angeli can come in, has the look test that we talked about here. And the big thing, Pete, for Syracuse is their schedule is unbelievable this year. It is one of the hardest schedules I have ever seen Syracuse play. All their tough games, including a little game in South Bend on November 22nd, are on the road or on neutral sites. They open with Tennessee, in Atlanta. They go to Miami. They go to SMU. They go to every game on that schedule of value, it seems, is on the road. And Angeli's got a little experience, whereas nobody else in that room right now. It's a very young quarterback room at Syracuse. And I just look at it that football coaches love experience, and they love leadership, and they love guys that command a room. So could that give Angeli a little bit of an edge just from the standpoint of he's played Penn State in a college football playoff and could make those coaches fall in love with him? And again, combined with the fact that Collins suffered an injury at the end of camp, I think this might rejuvenate a quarterback competition at Syracuse that seemed to be over with Collins taking it.
Yeah, I certainly don't think Angeli would end up there if it was like a 50-50 proposition to start. The experience part was one of the reasons that I thought Notre Dame might roll with him at the beginning of the season and then let Carr grow into the job if he's as good as everyone thinks he is, because Notre Dame starts at Miami. Angeli has not played a lot of high stress football, but certainly the end of the first half against Penn State in the Orange Bowl was big, and he held up just fine. So I would think that Angeli coming from a winning program at Notre Dame where there's a certain expectation about how you do your job, how you show up, how you work, how you practice, versus all due respect, LSU has been all over the map the last few years. Steve is an incredibly mature, even keel guy. That's another thing I think coaches really like in their quarterbacks. So if I was Fran Brown, maybe Collins is your long-term answer, but I don't think that's are you really going to be gambling on that in year two when you've got the schedule that you mentioned versus hey, we got to figure out a way that we can just scratch out 6, 7, 8 wins against a brutal schedule. So that I think Angeli probably is a safer bet that way.
And there is a bit of a connection. Angeli went to Bergen Catholic in New Jersey. Nunzio Campanelli's on the Syracuse staff as the co-offensive coordinator and quarterback coach. His brother Vito is the head coach there. Fran Brown has recruited the Northeast forever. And certainly they know of Steve Angeli, and it's those connections you have in the portal seem to be pretty important, and they can kind of hit the ground running with him a little bit there. A couple more for you here, Pete. While we're at the end of camp here and spring is over, yes, the portal is still open as we speak, so we kind of have to leave that window open that other things could happen. But by and large, the quarterback situation was the focus, but What else can you tell us about Notre Dame in spring, their portal situation coming and going, and what the expectation will be for the Irish, at least right now, coming into the 2025 season, which, again, Syracuse will visit in late November?
Yeah, I mean, the spring portal has been very quiet for Notre Dame. They've lost Steve Angeli, Kennedy Urlacher, who was kind of a third-team safety who they liked, but again, he's a third-team safety. If that's who you're losing in the portal, then you're winning. So they haven't added anybody in the spring portal. I don't think that they will. They've had some conversations like whether can they find a defensive end or a receiver to help the cause, but I think for the most part, Notre Dame they're more focused on like the 105, the house settlement. How do we get down, opposed to who do we add? So, I mean, Notre Dame they've done a really nice job, I think, positioning themselves as one of the programs in the portal who's just looking for like a finishing piece here or there, adding a half dozen guys that are all frontline players opposed to, having to rebuild their roster every year. And they haven't lost guys that they've wanted to keep the last few years, and that's continued. So it's, would they have loved to keep Steve Angeli? Yes. But if you're losing the guy who is number 3 in your quarterback race, I think you sort of have to live with that in 2025. So Notre Dame should be very good this fall when Syracuse visits. If we can get a CJ Carver, Steve Angeli matchup, that would be amazing. But Notre Dame, I think, is built to make another run at the college football playoff. They're not nearly as old as they were last year. That was like the oldest Notre Dame team that I've ever covered, with all the kind of 6-year seniors and 5th-year seniors that they have. But it's a really talented team. And I think that making the playoff is Notre Dame's in the spot now where making the playoff is sort of the bare minimum to have a conversation about whether your season was a success or not. And I think Notre Dame's built to do that again this year.
Pete, thanks so much for the insight here. Interesting to see the comings and goings of the portal, and Steve Angeli walk it in here and could potentially swipe the starting quarterback job. So we'll keep our eyes on that and hope to catch up with you again soon. But if not, we will see you in South Bend.
All right. Thanks, Brent.
There he is, Pete Samson of The Athletic. Appreciate his time today. Busy time for him as well. Not so busy in terms of the portal, because Notre Dame's pretty quiet on that front, but certainly do appreciate the opportunity to catch up with Pete, the best guy covering Notre Dame out there. Well, things just got a lot more interesting, friends. The portal never sleeps. Syracuse now, again, has a legit quarterback competition. Rickie Collins currently holds the belt as the starting quarterback, but Steve Angeli is going to make a major move for that over the next few months here. There'll be much more to come on this. Certainly the portal is still open. Who's next? Does Syracuse add a big-time receiver to come in with Steve Angeli? Does that help them with a couple of receivers they have been pursuing? Jonte Cook is out there, who was at Texas. He was at Washington briefly. He was basically told to leave both places. He does have an arrest on his record, so Syracuse has to take that in consideration. If you're just looking at it from a pure talent standpoint, he is one of the more talented receivers in the portal. I've heard that Syracuse has been pursuing Cook pretty heavily. Cook has visited Syracuse, and I think they do have a good chance to sign him. So the quarterback position's hard to beat. Syracuse, of course, signed a linebacker today. Fran Brown noted 2 positions that Syracuse needed to target in the portal. One was quarterback, and the other was linebacker. And Syracuse has been tied to Andrew Simpson, who's one of the top linebackers in the portal. He's out of Boise State, but Syracuse got a pretty good linebacker today, and Gary Bryant III, who comes to Syracuse as an all-Missouri Valley linebacker in a big part of South Dakota's FCS quarterfinal win against Cal Davis. He had 15 tackles in that game. All told, he had over 100 tackles last year. Let me pull up his full numbers here. 102 tackles, 2 interceptions, a forced fumble. He has 2 years of eligibility remaining. Just want to see what his ranking is. Do we have I don't know if we have a portal ranking in there, but trust me, he was somebody that I visited USC and was a highly pursued talent in the portal. So Syracuse helps their positioning there. They had a offensive lineman from Rutgers visiting today. Syracuse signed Austin Collins, an offensive lineman from Louisville, a few days ago. Can they get Cook? Who else can they get cooking to add in the portal? The windows. Now, you can add people past the portal deadline of Friday. You just have to have your name in the portal by the time that window closes, which is, I believe, is at the end of the day Friday. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's April 25th. But it's going to close up soon. So you can still add players after that. They just have to have their name in the portal. And, of course, the question becomes now, who out of that quarterback room could add their name to the transfer portal? Jakari Williams. Does Rickie Collins do it? Syracuse has already had a couple of quarterbacks, mostly some walk-ons and guys that, frankly, were not going to be in competition for the job already step aside. The portal never sleeps, friends, and we will be tracking it for you here on Syracuse Sports, on syracuse.com, and, of course, the Syracuse Sports Insider text line. Sign up today. Join subtext.com/Syracuse Sports. It gives you direct text message access to me. I'm going to get off the pod here and respond to some of those texts right now, and we'll keep you updated on everything that's happening in portal world. But for now, Syracuse football as a quarterback competition once again. Steve Angeli added to the portal from the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. This has been a live edition of Syracuse Sports. Thanks to Chris Carlson and Pete Samson. Thanks to you guys for hanging. I would encourage you to subscribe, follow Syracuse Sports on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. I've got a new episode of Syracuse Sports coming up tomorrow, guys. Tomorrow being Thursday, depending on when you're listening to this later. We're going to talk to Matt Perino of the Shout podcast and our Buffalo Bills coverage on syracuse.com about the NFL draft. And we did a Syracuse football mock draft with our Syracuse Sports Insiders, I should say, ranking the Syracuse football players and where they're going to go in the upcoming NFL draft. Could be a record number of Syracuse players in the modern era taken if they can get up in that 6 territory, but maybe even 4 or 5 Syracuse players taken in the draft. We shall see, and we'll be discussing that. So that pod is coming out on Thursday, but we thank you for watching and listening to this edition of Syracuse Sports. My name is Brent Dax. We'll catch you next time, guys. Thanks for hanging. Enjoy the rest of your evening.